Hi friends, welcome to Story Camp, Chapter 3, The Wild Wood. I don't know how wild this wood is, but here I am out in the woods behind the church, and I have my toboggan hat on, not because I'm cold, but because today's chapter is supposed to take place in the wild wood in the snow. So I couldn't reproduce snow this summer, but I thought I'd wear my hat just to remind us what season we're in Chapter 3, The Wild Wood. The mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of the badger. He seemed, by all accounts, to be such an important person, though rarely visible. But whenever the mole mentioned his wish to the water rat, he always found himself put off. "It's all right," the rat would say. "Badger'll turn up some day or other. He's always turning up, and then I'll introduce you, the best of fellows." Couldn't you ask him here? Dinner or something?" said the mole. "He wouldn't come," replied the rat simply. "Badger dislikes society and invitations and dinners and parties and all that sort of thing." "Well then, supposing we go and call on him," suggested the mole. "Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all," said the rat. "He's so very shy. It's quite out of the question also, because he lives smack dab in the middle of the wild wood. He'll be coming along someday. Just wait patiently." Now, in the wintertime, the rat slept a great deal, retiring early and rising late. During his short days, he sometimes scribbled poetry or did other small domestic jobs about the house. And of course, there were always animals dropping in for a chat. Consequently, there was a good deal of jolly storytelling. This, however, left Mole with a good deal of spare time on his hands. And so, one afternoon, when the rat in his armchair before the fire was alternately dozing and trying over rhymes that just wouldn't rhyme, he formed the resolution to go out by himself and explore the wild wood and perhaps strike up an acquaintance with Mr. Badger. It was a cold, still afternoon with a hard, steely sky overhead when he slipped out of the warm parlor into the open air. With great cheerfulness of spirit, he pushed on toward the wild wood which lay before him, low and threatening. Then, what seemed like faces began. It was over his shoulder and indistinctly that he first thought he saw a face looking out at him from a hole. When he turned and confronted it, the thing had vanished. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there would simply be no end to it. But then what he thought was pattering of feet began. He thought it was only falling leaves at first, so slight and delicate was the sound. Then suddenly the pattering increased till it sounded like sudden hail on the dry leaf carpet spread around him. The whole wood seemed to be running now hard, hunting, chasing, closing in round him. In panic, he began to run too, aimlessly. He ran up against things, he fell over things and into things, he darted under things and dodged round things. At last, he took refuge in the deep, dark hollow of an old beech tree, which offered shelter, concealment, perhaps even safety, but who could tell? And as he lay there panting and trembling and listened to the patterings outside, he knew it at last in all its fullness, that dreaded thing which other little dwellers in fields and hedgerows had encountered here and known as their darkest moment. that thing which the rat had vainly tried to shield him from the terror of being lost in the wild wood. Now, meantime, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozing by the fire, his paper of half-finished poems slipped from his knees, his head fell back, his mouth opened, and he wandered by the green banks of dream rivers. Then a coal slipped, the fire crackled and sent up a spurt of flame, and he woke with a start. Remembering what he had been engaged upon, he reached down to the floor for his poetry, pored over it for a moment, and then looked round for the mole to ask him if he knew a good word to rhyme with this or that. But the mole was not there. He listened for a time. The house seemed very quiet. Then he called, "Moley," several times, and receiving no answer, got up and went out into the hall. The mole's cap was missing from its accustomed peg. His galoshes, which always lay by the umbrella stand, were also gone. The rat left the house and carefully examined the muddy surface of the ground outside, hoping to find the mole's tracks. He could see the imprints of them in the mud running along straight and purposeful, leading directly to the wild wood. The rat looked very grave and stood in deep thought for a minute or two. Then he re-entered the house, took up his stout walking stick that stood in the corner of the hall, and set off for the wild wood at a smart pace. It was already getting towards dusk when he reached the first fringe of trees and plunged without hesitation into the wood, looking anxiously on either side for any sign of his friend. And all the time calling out cheerfully, "Moley, Moley, Moley, where are you? It's me, it's old Rat." He had patiently hunted through the wood for an hour or more, when at last, to his joy, he heard a little answering cry. Guiding himself by the sound to the foot of an old beech tree with a hole in it, and from out of the hole came a feeble voice saying, "Ratty, Ratty, is that really you?" The rat crept into the hollow, and there he found the mole, exhausted and still trembling. "Oh, Rat," he cried, "I've been so frightened you can't think." "Oh, I quite understand," said the rat soothingly. "Now then," said the rat presently, "we really must pull ourselves together and make a start for home while there's still a little light left. It will never do to spend the night here, you understand." He went to the entrance of their retreat and put his head out. "What's up, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Snow is up," replied the rat briefly, "or rather down. It's snowing quite hard." The mole came and crouched beside him, looking out, saw the wood that had been so dreadful to him in quite a changed aspect. "Well, well, it can't be helped," said the rat after pondering. "We must make a start and take our chance, I suppose. The worst of it is, I don't know exactly where we are, and now this snow makes everything look so very different. We shall have to make a push for it and do something or another. The cold is too awful for anything, and the snow will be soon too deep for us to wade through." So they got on their feet and struggled down into the dell, where they hunted about for a cave or some corner that was dry and a protection from the keen wind and the whirling snow. When suddenly the mole tripped up and fell forward on his face with a squeal. "Oh, poor old mole," said the rat kindly. "You aren't having much luck today, are you?" "I must have tripped over a hidden branch or a stump," said the mole miserably. He pondered a while and examined the snow-covered humps and slopes that surrounded them. "Well, never mind what done it," said the mole, forgetting his grammar in the pain. "It hurts just the same, whatever done it." But the rat was busy scraping in the snow. He scratched and shoveled and explored, all four legs working busily while the mole waited impatiently, remarking at intervals, "Come on, rat!" Suddenly, the rat cried, "Hooray!" and then, "Hooray!" and fell to executing a feeble little jig in the snow. "What have you found?" asked the mole. "There, there!" exclaimed the rat in great triumph. "Look at that!" It was a doormat. "Well, now," said Mole, "you seem to have found a piece of litter someone threw away. Can we eat a doormat, or sleep under a doormat, or sit on a doormat and sledge home over the snow on it?" "Do you mean to say," cried the excited rat, "that this doormat doesn't tell you anything?" "Really, rat," said the mole, "I think we've had enough of your folly. Who ever heard of a doormat telling anyone anything? They simply don't do it. They're not that sort at all. Doormats know their place." "Now look here," replied the rat, "this must stop. Not another word. Just get to scraping. Scrape, scrape, scratch, dig, and hunt if you want to sleep dry and warm tonight, for this is our last chance." Some 10 minutes hard work, and the point of Rat's walking stick struck something that sounded hollow. In the side of what had seemed to be a snowbank stood a solid-looking little door, painted a dark green. An iron bell pull hung by the side, and below it, on a small brass plate, neatly engraved in square capital letters, they could read by the light of the moon, "Mr. Badger." The mole fell backward on the snow from sheer surprise and delight. "Rat," he cried in penitence, "you're a wonder, a real wonder. That's what you are." At once, together, they rang the bell and hammered on the door until from inside they heard footsteps. Let's talk a little bit about what we're learning here in chapter 3 before we end our time together. First off, let's talk about the kingdom of God. We've learned about friendship, we've learned about loyalty, and we see even more of that in this chapter. We certainly see the friendship between Mole and Rat deepening, their friendship, their care for one another, and we see their loyalty playing out even more. Mole heads out towards the wildwood to try to meet Mr. Badger against Ratty's instructions, and he gets lost. And when Ratty realizes this, he doesn't even think about himself. He gets himself dressed, gets his walking stick, and heads right out to find Mole, to rescue him. And that's what Jesus does for us. Jesus is our rescue plan, God's rescue plan for us. We get ourselves lost sometimes, don't we, when we do things our way instead of God's way. And I'm so thankful that Jesus is our friend, that Jesus is a loyal friend, that Jesus comes out and finds us no matter what. Jesus is our helper. And we see this kingdom of God idea in chapter 3. Let's talk about homes. Let's talk about homes. I love in this story that the thing that rescues them once they're back out in the woods together, Mole and Rat, is a welcome mat, right? Maybe you have a welcome mat out in front of your one of your doors to your home. Welcome mats are just that. They're oftentimes they say welcome right across from them. It's a way that we let people know that we like welcoming people into our home. You are welcome to come in, to sit down. Maybe we'll share a meal together. It is good for our homes to be welcoming. Jesus is, of course, so welcoming to us. Jesus welcomes us into God's kingdom, into God's home. Let's talk about nature again. Here we see a different season. We started in the spring, then we had some chapter 2 was in the summer, and here we are into winter. Seasons are such an important part of our lives. We have different seasons in our spiritual lives too. We have seasons where we're learning new things about who God is and what God's doing, and we have times where we sort of curl up and get small, and we're just patiently waiting for the work that God promises God will do in our lives. So nature's a wonderful way of teaching us about what living a life with God is like. And then finally, transformation, right? As disciples, we are called to live transformed lives, changed lives. And I want to read to you from Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, Molly walked through a dark valley, didn't he? He got lost. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, here's the good part, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You're with me, Jesus. You're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Ratty had his walking stick, and that's what he used to find the mat, isn't it? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just like Ratty went after Mole, God's love through Jesus will come after us, to find us, to rescue us. Great thoughts. Let's think about that this week. Know you're loved, know you're appreciated, and know that you're prayed for. All right, bye.